and we're good. So, like I said, a couple things that I wanted to go over. And again, some of it you might already know, some of it you might not. But at least it's all in one place so that you can find it. Um, Wanted to go over some of the Photoshop first just because I forgot to mention it when the last tutorial that we went through. So pretty simple stuff. It was really basically about shadows, right? And that there's of course different ways to make those shadows. I've already gone over how to make them for the building, simply a lasso tool, and of course just drawing those in, using a brush layer. I think that can be pretty artistic, right? Even for a digital tool, it starts to helpfully blend between those two objects. In my case, I'm going to need some arrows because I don't have any drawn or anything like that, so I'm just going to grab some from Google. Pretty slow internet today, but it is what it is. Nothing really fancy today. Dare I say even architectural. We might even be able to find some free-handed. How about that? Oh, those are pretty nice. And really similar to anything that we can bring in, a really good image type is actually a PNG. I don't know if I've mentioned this actually, but even typing that PNG can go a long way. And you get yourself actually a background that's already transparent, right? Sometimes pretty useful, especially for something like this, which is actually, you know what? That looks pretty cool. I'm gonna use it today. Maybe there's a better one. I don't know, it looks too much like Amazon, especially that one. That one definitely looks like Amazon. Maybe there's some with more regularity. Obviously, I'd just want to draw these myself. That way I kind of had them always on hand, and it's still me, right? I mean, who really wants to call something that they're creating all the time actually an assumption of all other people's parts? I don't know, some people aren't bothered by that, but if it were me, I'd draw up my own like this, several different types that I could use. That way I can scan them and further my drawings, right? I don't have to do necessarily this draw and scan all the time for every piece. In fact, eventually you want to build a repertoire, right, of all these different pieces, textures, materials. You want to save all those things. That way you can start to have some consistency and save yourself some time, right? Which is actually another, maybe I'll bring that up later. It's just an organizing thing, and we're going to start talking about getting organized in the computer. If that's something you're not already doing, right? In my computer graphics, I say it all the time. You should be, of course, labeling everything accordingly, because you'll really help yourself out 10 years from now. But we'll get closer to that as we go. But yeah, I might want to save these arrows for later. And arguably, this is actually really good inspiration for all the different kinds of arrows that you could draw, right? Not necessarily have to even take these ones. Anyway, let's take that piece, open it up in a new window, and save that image. Looks like it's coming from Pinterest anyway. Open image in a new tab, and it doesn't look like it's an actual PNG, so let's get something else. It's fake. However, it might be on PNG Tree, and that was just a thumbnail. But I would imagine it probably wants us to pay for it in some way. Could probably take that one, but again, it's not hard to remove the background, but it's just annoying. But I'll show you how to, just in case you don't know. So let's take that piece. In my case, it looks like I have to screenshot it. That's okay. There are actually many sites where you can pay for all these things, but you know how to draw, you've taken freehand 1 or 2, you don't have to pay for them, right? Plus you can always screenshot them and Photoshop them away. So in my case, I'm going to open that. Go to my desktop, take that screenshot, and we got that piece. I'm going to have to do my blending options. So blending options, I'm going to have to go to multiply and take the white out, and in this case the gray as well. Don't want to take away too much. We'll start to get rid of that blue. But those are looking pretty good at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and hit C for crop and just take my new crop. Pretty sweet. And right now it looks like I have some information in there. And I don't know if I've shown you guys this, how to fix stuff like that. You can use a stamp tool, which is the letter S, or this guy right here. the clone stamp tool, make it a little bit smaller. And basically the way that it works is you tell the computer what you want it to copy, right? So in this case, I want it to copy that color blue, right? And in my case, of course, it needs to be a smart object. So I'll right click, convert to smart object. May even need to rasterize it, which is fine. You guys know all about that now. Oh, and of course you have to select the layer. In my case, if I hold Option on the Mac or Alt on Windows, it basically gives me a tool of, hey, what do you want to copy, right? So in my case, this blue area that has no text, I'll click, and then essentially wherever I brush, it'll start to get rid of that per copying exactly what it sees, right? So in my case, just getting that color and essentially getting rid of it. Pretty simple tool, especially for unwanted watermarks, right? Not too bad, it's looking pretty good. I'll go ahead and take that, copy, and put it into my drawing. Those are pretty wicked small, and that's okay. For today's tutorial, not too bad, not too shabby. But similar, you know, what reminds me of Leo's that we saw on Friday, where, you know, we saw the arrows right at the corner, right? Very, you know, you'd want them to engage the page in some way, especially if your site's sort of center justified on the site analysis, right? You'd want them to interact and really communicate the angle that they're coming from, maybe how intense they are. So if they were more intense, you know, I might draw some bigger ones, right? You could make them a little faded. Yeah, I can go over that as well. Let's flip some a little bit. Almost nobody would even know that those are the same ones, right? I can mess with their proportion a little bit. And now they can both be coming off the page and over the site and in a particular direction, right? I could even use those same ones and make some red ones, right? So we'll take that. Maybe that floats over a little bit that way. Maybe this is my center of my site. I'll go ahead and take that layer, image, adjustments, and replace that color. I'll click on the color itself so it knows what color to go for, and basically switch it to red. Now I got some heat ones, all from the exact same arrows, and now they're quite consistent with each other. Yes, Louise? How did I do that? Sure. So I just did undo real quick. I have to select a layer, so in my case I should be more organized and say like heat arrows, or even more specific than that, I could say the trade winds of so-and-so's direction. I could really get specific. And the reason for that, guys, is one day you're gonna be doing like 6 projects at a time, and you're gonna like forget which ones are where. And then very often you have to give your file to somebody else, and they're like, who the hell worked on this? You know, like, I don't know where anything is. And trust me, I've seen people get promotions just for being organized. Like, it goes a long way. Anyway, but to answer your question, we'll take that layer, we'll go to Image, Adjustments, and Replace Color. Once I'm in Replace Color, I'll need to click on the color that I want to replace. In this case, it'll be that blue. This is the actual initial color, and then this is what it turns into. So like maybe I just wanted a brighter blue, I could, right? But in my case, I'm just going to double click on the color and switch it to red. And I like more of a crimson red. But just as Leo was you know, professing as well, I could take these and make them a little bit more transparent. Yeah, that starts to make it a little bit more, okay, it's not, I can see the road kind of through it, you know, it starts to have this level of communication. That's pretty good. Should probably do it to that one too. I'd probably want to put all my arrows together for this next one, but I don't necessarily have to. I can always group them and just call them, you know, wind arrows. But what's nice is I can copy that. So in my case, duplicate this group. And in my case, I want to make this called the shadows. So I want to show a couple of ways to actually make these shadows. Some of them I think are better than others. One of my favorites, because there's a little bit more play and I think it's easier to do, is to take your new layer right? And of course make it black and white. Or, you know, a dark purple. So in my case, I'll turn this one off real quick, turn that one on, and I could just change it to a grayscale for this lack of time, or change the color again of these arrows. But I think I want to do something that will save me some time. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten just my shadows. Right, so merge layers. That'll be my shadow layer. And essentially change that color. So in my case, I can do adjustments again. Replace color. Let's replace the blue first. Make it a dark purple. Sweet. And at least we got those. Do the same thing again now that it's all the same layer. Replace color. Take that red. Same thing. A really dark color. Now, just like we went over last time, we'd want to make that transparent, for the most part, like a shadow would be. I may need to put my other ones actually on, take that layer, and move it. So in my case, not select it, but move it. Right. And I'm not liking how purple it is, so I'm just gonna go and mess around with its color balance. Get maybe into its shadows a little bit and make it darker. A little too red. That's looking a little better. And arguably I'd still probably take it down quite a bit, to where it was just a little hint, right? Starting to encompass the site. Now, of course, a lot more things would be happening, but that's probably one of the easiest ways, right? Is just kind of simply put them in there, not a big deal. And really, we're probably not used to looking at this view, so let's maybe look at it that way. Just because as soon as you see shadows kind of going off in a weird direction, it's kind of messes with the brain, I think, a little bit. So hopefully you can see that a little bit better, right? It starts to almost hover across the page. Well, we'll let the computer figure it out real quick. I'm pretty sure when I scanned this, it was at 450. And as you can see, it takes my computer a lot more time to process. But yeah, definitely not bad shadows. Another way to do it, just in case you don't want to do all that, is you could right click on the layer. Or sorry, I don't know if we can do this from a group. I don't think you can, but that's okay. You can take one at a time, just because of how easy it is. You can even double click on these, and you'll see an option, actually several different options, that you're more than welcome to test these things, but one specifically is actually a drop shadow. So you can just make drop shadows based off of smart objects. And of course it has to be a smart object first. Now this is where it can kind of get a little tricky in terms of, this is where I meant it's less intuitive, right? You really have to know the angle, set the angle, and sometimes if you have 20 different shadows, you got to do it for all 20 shadows. And of course the same numbers and variables, otherwise you get all these crazy shadows. Which is why I think it's easier to just make a copy and offset it a little bit. However, that is only one height too. So if I wanted to make those arrows really look like they were at different heights, I'd kind of give them different little shadows, right? To kind of get that point across that they're sort of floating over the page. That way they're not flat like this. Anyway, so we'll take our drop shadow. I'll click on drop shadow. For the most part, it is intuitive. I wouldn't be too scared of it. You can select the distance. All right, so in my case, it should have a preview, but doesn't look like it. So let's make sure we're on the right layer. Yep, I was trying to do it to the heat. Let's do it to the heat layer. Blending options. Drop shadow. Oh, it does have to be enacted. I guess mine wasn't. We can change the angle, the opacity, the spread, and as you can see, it's kind of there, but it's kind of going in all directions. You kind of see that? It's like a outline almost. You control the size. I kind of like the blurry shadowness, but it should really go off in only one direction, so I'm going to go with normal. Kind of funky, to be fair. However, I'm not the master of this either, so okay, there we go, get some distance. It drops out a little bit, yeah. It's kind of got a similar effect. Okay, and we can change the direction. It's kind of a weird update, but yeah, essentially get the same thing. Looks like we can max out on distance though. That kind of stinks. But for the most part, looks like we can control quite a bit. Not too shabby. Definitely an interesting little pop, for sure. Luckily I saved mine so we can see how mine does. Arguably the same thing, just a different color. Right? Anyway, just forgot that piece of evidence to work with. There is more, and it actually pertains probably more to your actual site analysis. Did she recommend anything in terms of basically what she wants to see? Like drainage, obviously sun and wind, I'd imagine. To scale on 11 by 17 or? Okay.
That's the one to show like the relation point with the traffic and I guess places of interest, you could say.
Sure. Okay. Does want the contour line. Sweet. Did she say that she wants you to make a digital model, or? I can't imagine she went that far.
Yeah.
Right. I may have given away too much, right? However, I do want to kind of touch upon it today, just in case you never got that information. I think I've already shown you guys specifically how to put something to scale, right? To take a Google image, make a measurement. And very often, the best way to check it, guys, is to actually go out and measure the sidewalks in some cases and get that exact measurement, right? Because then you can align it with this image even better, right? And to be completely fair, you guys know how they got this contour map, right? A lot of drones. Yeah, they actually have these drones now that have LiDAR on them, and they're really sweet. But they basically make a digital model by essentially hovering about 300 to 400 feet above the Earth's surface, and really grabs all these topography lines. However, that doesn't mean somebody actually went on there and got them, right? And let's face it, even weather causes these to slightly change and things like that. So it's really hard for architects to be accurate, even though we're trying to be as much as humanly possible. But I just want to throw it out there. The more things that you do to make those things even more perfect, again, promotions. Right? I mean, right there, when the principal sees that, wow, these are very accurate. Anyway, that's why I'd promote somebody anyway. With that being said, I do want to go over this just in case nobody has. And I know all of us have Rhino 8 now and things like that. Some of us may have never traced an image in Rhino. So again, might be a refresher for most of us. But I just want to make it available, right? And show you a little bit extra that you can do with that, since we do have some information such as the numbers and levels with these topography maps. So I'm just going to start a new file. And just in case you've never heard this before, I know you have if you were in my class, but what scale do we make a digital model? All together, 1:1. We make it the true scale that it is. If it's 10 light years thick, we make it 10 light years, right? If it's 40 feet tall, we make it 40 feet tall, right?
Yeah.
However, you're kind of on the right track. I maybe might use inches if I was working with handbags and I was stating that, this handbag is 14 by 20 inches, right? I'd want to stick to the scale of the drawing. In your case, you probably want feet, right? Your numbers actually on your topography maps will all be in feet, right? So it makes a lot of sense you should use feet. Now, if you're doing scans in Canada, use meters, right? And of course, the specific locations of where you are. I'm gonna close my Photoshop so it doesn't destroy my computer. Say that again, Leo? I'll go over that a little bit today. Yeah.
When did you get Rhino 8?
I can give it to you. You should already have it. Well, you have Rhino 7. I don't have the Rhino 8 for Windows. But
You said 6 now. We got Rhino 8. I'm like, when did you get it?
it's like, what? I missed that, dude.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I'm like, when did
Hold on, let me close this. So you can only have so many programs open at a time. Let's try that again. But yeah, I kind of just want to go over some of the, I know kind of the basic site questions that you'll have, but topography can kind of add to that. And there's a couple of tricks, like how many of you guys have heard of vectorize? I mean, most of us could, context clues and put that together that, oh, maybe it turns stuff into vectors, But you may have noticed that even the lines that you get, even in the image that she gave you, they're pretty pixelated, right? They're, dare I say, even unusable lines, right? I wouldn't want to show, especially those yellow lines, right, on my document, right? After all, I'm making art and science here. Why would I want to distract them with the poor quality that comes from the internet, right? I don't. So, first things first, let's get a section of that piece. So, San Antonio contours and hydrology. Don't need all that now. Our favorite website. I know it's one of mine. And in our case, I just kind of want to go over the basics. So, do you guys have an address for your site? I don't know if this actually takes addresses, but it's worth a shot. It's alright, doesn't really matter. Well, I'll go to my go-to spot, of course, San Pedro Springs Park, in a very dense area. You'll also notice that you kind of have a limited zoom in for this website as well. Again, for the reason for that pixelation is because we usually make it a lot bigger, right? So let's take a section of it. In my case, I'm just going to screenshot a portion. It's looking pretty good. Now, in my case, I'd want to get some sort of measurement out of there. In fact, well, I know from here to there, it's about 55 feet. So, I mean, let's just say that was 55 feet. I guess I could double check and go to Google Earth and get that measurement just to check. I can even overlay my drawings just like I do in Photoshop or Illustrator. I can also do that in Rhino. So just in case nobody's ever shown you or you haven't run across that yet. It's usually something we kind of fly through in computer graphics. It's just almost treated as like a basic, but as that loads, let's make a new model today. Think about it. Oh, it's thinking. There we go. So just like Leo was saying, we'll want to check our units. In my case, it's got to load some more, I guess. No response. Let's see how Google Earth's going. Huh. Oh, I think I know what it is. Maybe not. Try one more time. Screen recording unfortunately does take a lot of processing power. And it doesn't look like today's internet is very helpful today either. But obviously, basically what I'm doing is remaking this map that you already have, right? So at least verifying it in some sort of way. Of course, in this case with Google Earth, right? So we'll go across the street. I'd want to at least get that number for myself. So just to double check. And we'll fake it till we make it. Dang, was I close or what? 55 feet. Anyway. Doesn't happen too often. But nice. So definitely from there to there is 55 feet. It's almost like I've done this many times. Doesn't seem like a new model's working for me today. Maybe because of my screen share. But let's go ahead and open up something previous. That may work. Or it might just get stuck. Today. Can't tell if it's thinking about it. Okay, it was thinking about it. Thinking about a lot of it. Okay. Well, I think it's time for a new computer. At least for what I'm doing all the time. Definitely my graphics card issue. Yeah, so if you ever see one of your viewports just kind of color out, it means you have a graphics card issue, right? Or maybe you're trying to screen record or somebody else is screen recording on your computer. Definitely not impossible. But in my case, it looks like I may have messed with the background on this one, or the background is messing up. So, oh, it's in rendered. That'll do it too. So, let's hide this real quick, just to kind of go over what I was going over. Leo kind of had a question about, well, you know, this grid box and, you know, what do I do with it? What's it even called? It's known as your C-plane, bless you. And it doesn't really matter. Honestly, you'll never see it, never prints out, and really it's just for you to understand where three-dimensional space is. In fact, you can move your C-plane, you can reorient your C-plane, and some people accidentally do it all the time, right? I'm still uncertain how people accidentally move their C-plane, but they do. In fact, if you just type in C-plane, right, it gives you a shit ton of options, right, to say the very least. And of course, if you're on Windows, you'll see a list of options at the top on your command bar, right? But in our case, you can do lots of stuff to it. In Leo's case, he may want to move it or make it bigger, make it smaller, and you can definitely do those things too. But it's known as your world, right? So your C-plane world is how you'll actually control it, right? So I don't want to get in that too much. I like kind of just my default and knowing where 0, 0, 0 is all the time. However, if you accidentally move yours too, you can reset it with this command as well. Right, so using your C-plane command does a lot of stuff. In fact, I bet there's entire YouTube videos on just controlling the C-plane, to be honest. But at least for today, he brings up a really good point, because if I type in units with an S, enter, of course I can change those units, and I'll want to make my site plan, at least in a digital space, at 1:1 scale. I don't want to make it to 1:20, because, well, what happens when my professor goes, now I want it at 1/16? Now I got to make a whole nother digital file that is a whole nother scale, right? If I keep it at a 1:1 scale, I can always change the paper size, right? Which, let's face it, we do all the time. But in my case, I want to make it in feet because it comes in feet. So it's already good to go there. And as what Leo was mentioning, each of these boxes actually represents 1 foot, right? So again, if I'm in millimeters, all of those boxes represent 1 millimeter. So it can get really annoying if I'm building my architecture in millimeters, because suddenly I'm way off into space, right? And no longer feels like I'm on my C-plane, right? Which I think all of us have definitely shared before. Anyway, to get my picture in here, quite intuitive, I'm just gonna type in picture. And I'm gonna take that screenshot that I took earlier. So in my case, I think it's this one. Yep, that's the one. Now I need to make it 1:1 scale, and you'll notice that I just picked up 2 points, right? I'm not really worried about what size it is right now. This is the part where I do want to make it to scale. So in my case, I learned that it's 55-foot line from edge to edge. So in my case, I'm going to draw a line anywhere. Type in 5, and then the foot symbol. You can also type in feet, right? So just in case you were in miles, like say your units were in miles, and you still wanted to get a foot option, you can type in feet, inches, millimeters. It just has to be spelled correctly. So, I mean, most of us know how to spell feet. But once you type those in fact, it's going to lock on and then ask you, well, what kind of angle do you want it? In my case, I want it 0. So I'm going to hold shift, click, and now I have a line that is 55 feet. And by golly, man, I'm just like working it with the scale today. So close. Anyway, but not quite. And really the easiest way to do this is to select the image, type in scale, enter, and you'll notice that yes, there are 3 different scales commands in Rhino. But in my case, it's going to ask for a base point, and this one I'm going to pick the one where I put the line and the base image in the same spot. Click on my base image. Now it's going to say, okay, where's the reference point? In my case, I want to take this other side and make it 55 feet. So I'm going to take that as my reference point and slowly bring it to 55 feet. Now aligning 55 with the image itself, making both to a 1:1 scale. I'll go ahead and click, and it exits the command of scale. And now whatever dimension that we actually do on this will be some sort of true scale. So what's nice about this, especially if you've got buildings and cars and parking lots, and now all that stuff becomes really measurable, right? So for instance, if I have 2 lines, just for, poops and giggles. Of course, I would need 2 different lines to make a dimension, but I can type in DIM for dimension. I can select 2 points, so in my case, that point, and it'll quite literally give me 13.48 feet. Now, don't get me wrong, some people don't like decimals and things like that, and you can change that in your preferences as well, right? So your actual, I think it's actually called graphic settings. Well, let's try settings first. Yeah, so instead of decimal, I'll want it, say, maybe in feet and inches. However, I don't think it changes current existing ones, so let's try that again and see if it's changed now. If not, then it's probably a different setting. Yeah, it's probably a different setting. Pretty sure it's with, I know it in AutoCAD, but I don't think it's the same command. I'll have to look it up. Anyway, not a big deal now that it becomes a workable drawing. The next thing that you would want to do is, of course, trace these lines, which, don't get me wrong, I think is actually the best way and teaches you a lot about the site, because let's face it, topography lines are really tricky sometimes. In fact, there's like holes, there's pitfalls, you don't know if it's going down or up, and you do have to critically think about some of the maps that you get off these hydrology maps. As mentioned, it comes from a drone scanning, right? So they're not entirely accurate sometimes. But that being the case, just in case you don't know this, we could use this program like Illustrator. So I could take my file and I'd want to go to my properties. So in my case, this little guy right here. And it's a little paint tube. If you're not familiar with all the different icons that are on Rhino, I'll click on that little paint tube. In fact, I can scroll down to object transparency and it treats it as an object. So very much like Photoshop, right? Instead of it being a layer though, it's its own object. But it's really nice because, well, I can put that there, I can lock it, and I can not accidentally move it, and I can make stuff that I just traced a lot easier to delete, right? Here's the first method. Just trace it. So using a polyline, or one of my favorite tools, this guy, I don't even know what he's called. Control curve, control point curve, whatever that is. I use it all the dang time, and I'll simply just trace what I'm doing. Faking it till I make it, and really just making the topography lines my own. As you can imagine, it takes a little while. But as I was also mentioning, really good, right? And something that I only have to do once, as I can take it into Illustrator, Photoshop, and all kinds of things, right? And now not as a super pixelated, ugly ass line. Anyway, sorry my French. Situations like this are pretty interesting. You might have to add more points, and I'll do a couple of lines just for the sake of tutorial. But naturally, as you can imagine, some sites are more intense than others. It looks like your site isn't honestly that bad. There was one competition year where they had to make each 128 layers, right? So it could be a lot worse and may get a lot worse, right? But you'll be prepared because you've done these smaller projects. in theory, of course. But we'll at least get one of those, and you'll notice what I like to do is actually click on the outside of the line. That way I can always trim it off, or if I need to extend it, I know exactly where the line is. But arguably, damn, that line's way better than that orange line that we started out with. What's also another cool thing is that, well, since I'm in this program, I technically made it in three-dimensional space. If I zoom out actually on the actual picture, it even shows some of the contour and the height of sea level that they're at, right? I think in San Pedro Park's case, it's like somewhere up there. I mean, I guess we can double check. 695 feet, right? So now I can literally put this line at 695, and well, technically I can build all my lines way up in the sky. Not technically incorrect. Or I can start doing it by relative elevation. Does anybody know what relative elevation is? Your reference point is you. So no matter where you are, that is what is defined as 0. Now you can always go with negative numbers, positive numbers, and in most cases what you actually want to see on a site plan analysis is not the actual elevation numbers. That's silly, right? Because nobody thinks that way, like, oh yes, I'm right now 1,611 feet above sea level. No, I want to use an elevation point that makes sense to me. So for instance, wherever your site usually is represents a 0, right? Or at least you'll basically pick a line that represents 0 now. Every line, at least on this map, now you have to be kind of cautious about what maps you choose, because sometimes they're actually 5 feet in level difference, but in most cases they're only 1 foot, right? And it's definitely in this case 1 foot intervals. So if this is my 0, the next line above it, +1. I may need to check Google Earth to actually make sure, or find another marker that expresses either a higher or a lower level. Does that make sense, guys? I know that you've probably already been explained this, but again, kind of a review for all of us. But now this one says +1, +2, +3, +4, +5, and it starts to communicate really well is, oh shit, there's a 19-foot drop on my side. But if it's all a bunch of random numbers, you might not necessarily get that sort of impact when somebody does need to see that 19-foot drop in your site plan analysis. Yes, Leah. Doesn't have to be, but your position of where your site is, let's face it, it might be in a valley, and yeah, it might be the 0 point and everything kind of goes up from there. If I'm on the side of a hill though, this would be my 0 point, these would start to go to negative, and this would start to go to positive. Does that make sense? So that you could start to go, oh wow, I have a 50-foot drop in my site. But that's because this one says -25, or sorry, +25 and -25, telling me I've got 50 feet. But that's a lot easier than going, I have 1,150 up here and I have 1,100. I mean, don't get me wrong, those are simple numbers. Somebody could probably put that together. But again, at the end of the day, you're trying to make it the simplest form of communication. And I'm just trying to throw some ideas out there of what does it mean to simplify information. And that's at least one way. However, there's other programs, and I usually only give this to my computer graphics students. So I won't show you how to install it or even really use it, because it's really for the more advanced students who have already been doing this a lot. Maybe they already know how to trace, and maybe they're ready for step 2, if you will. And it's going to be called Food for Rhino. So one of the best sites in the world, bookmark it, please. Food for Rhino. What's really funny is if you put rhino food, it actually gives you a website to like buy rhinoceros food, which I think is hilarious. But it is called Foo number 4 Rhino. And what's really nice is it has every plugin known to man for both the Macintosh, the Windows, and Linux systems for Rhino. Some of them, majority of them, are free, right? Some of them do require either a Windows computer. Some of them require a Macintosh computer. Most of the really popular ones are available for all platforms. But the one that you'll want, yes, there is a stair plugin, by the way, that works just like Revit. But this is definitely something I usually show my my computer graphics students. So in my case, I'm going to type in Vectorize, hopefully spelled it correctly, and it's this guy right here. Of course, it works on Windows, Mac, and just general rhinoceros on Linux. But it's a really great way to take any image and turn it into vectorized lines that I don't no longer have to trace, right? I'm not going to throw out there and say it's a perfect magic button, but for some of us, if you have thousands of lines, it starts to make a difference, right? And instead of tracing 1,000 lines for a client, you're now just vectorizing it and photoshopping it a little bit. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that too much. And in fact, if you just want to know how to install these, you will need to make a free account to be on Food for Rhino, but it's free. I would use your EDU account. Very often, there's actually some really cool freebies that are emailed to you because of having an EDU account. So that's kind of nice. Stuff that you would normally pay $5 for is like, here, download it for free. Sweet, right? I'm pretty sure I already have it, so let's test it out real quick. I mean, why not? In my case, I accidentally locked my image, so I need to type in unlock, and now I can select my image. So just in case you're ever in that peril of, why can't I? You just forgot that you locked it, right? When in doubt, press unlock, okay? Anyway, let's vectorize this thing. If I have I don't know if I have it on my laptop. Oh, I do. I'll hit vectorize. It's basically going to ask me for a standalone image of that image. So in my case, that one. And this is where it can get tricky. I'm not going to quite go over that. Of course, it's for the advanced students. But what's nice is it's going to go ahead and vectorize it for us. Doesn't look like my settings really worked, but again, this isn't a vectorized tutorial. And really, you should be tracing these lines anyway, right? Because, well, they're easy to manipulate. I can take that line, I can go into a different viewport, and basically just move it up a foot. So if I type in move, go up 12 inches, enter, and choose the direction. Now I have a really nice topography line that is in three-dimensional space. This would be a really good way to make a three-dimensional model, right? And start talking about this three-dimensionally, right? If you're in my computer graphics class, we're actually going to do this as a project, right? But since this is really just site plan analysis, you don't necessarily have to do that. You can stay in the 2D, and if you're unfamiliar with the 3D, trust me, there's plenty to learn in the 2D, right? However, if you've done enough 2D images and you want to expand on your skills, by all means, now you have the ability and of course the permission. I feel like there was one more thing I wanted to go over, but it is already 11 o'clock and I don't want to take too much of the working time now that you have two site plan analysis. But yeah, questions, definitely have time for them. What do you got? The solar? Oh yeah. That one's pretty simple. I was mentioning it on Friday. One of the best sites that I like to go to is called SunCalc. If it loads today. And really just an image search. Like if you did SunChart. SunChart is its technical name. So like if you said SunChart San Antonio, and of course SunCharts change all over the earth. Pretty much looks like what you're familiar with, right? There's the two-dimensional representation. Here's the elevational, right, representation, almost like a two-dimensional, but now elevational. So really trying to show off all those different angles that you would get. Basically in winter, obviously a lower angle of the sun, versus in the summer a much higher angle and a longer time period, of course, which makes it so hot. But let's look at it three-dimensionally. And usually there's an image or two about it, but they're not quite necessarily popular yet, right? We don't read the world in 3 dimensions. We read it always in 2 dimensions. SunChart. I mean, can you imagine if like your pilot like took a globe and he's like, "All right, I got my map, guys." Right? No, it's all these gigantic foldable maps. Anyway, but let's get a 3D one if we can. 3D. Not the best representation of it, although these charts are really cool where it shows a picture of the sun every single day and getting, other bits of information. In fact, if you're interested in going to UT Austin architecture program, they have this like $8 million room that's like dedicated to studying the sun. It's really amazing. Anyway, I've always wanted to just be a part of that. Here's that 3-dimensional sun I was talking about. And I wouldn't be surprised if this came off of some sort of program. We could probably do a little bit more research into this image, find out where it came from, and probably use that program ourselves. I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm not going to, of course, actually do that for us. But that is what I was trying to talk about, right? And really, it even starts to show off the solar analemma, which is the location of the sun at noon during all of those times. Really cool stuff. And again, these are things that you will naturally kind of just memorize, especially if you build in one location all the time. You kind of start to have this very symbiotic relationship with nature, if I'm being completely honest, right? As an architect, I find that I always know what direction I'm facing, right? And very confused if I'm caught in a spot where I don't, right? Very often you'll see that architects even try to guess the length of something, whether it be on a map or that paper, right? Anyway, that is a pretty good example, but SunCalc is that exact example too, right? What I like about SunCalc is it's pretty interactive. I can change it per any time in the future or past, basically just using its little charts. It even has one for the moon now. That's pretty cool. Where is it at? I know they have a moon chart, but pretty cool stuff. But yeah, just in case you need that further information, this is exactly what it's trying to tell you guys. This angle, and again, maybe it actually makes this chart make a little bit more sense that, okay, at 6 in the morning, there is no sun. That is why the sun is past the horizon, right? Right at the break of dawn, the sun has now hit the horizon and is now giving a strong eastern angle, right? To be fair, that's during the summer, that's during the fall. You'll notice that this slowly starts to go to the winter and then back to the spring and then back to summer and then back to fall, and then, you see what I'm saying here, right? The sun does same thing over and over again. It's pretty great. Glad it does. And as they say, there's nothing new under the sun. But anyway, I'll leave it at that for today, unless there are specific questions about Photoshop or what I did in Rhino, such as scaling or tracing. Any questions like that? Hopefully, for the most part, a nice refresher or a review. But as you guys know, we'll have our 2 pinups on Friday. Wednesday's a work day, so please make the best of it. And of course, we'll be here to answer some questions, as well as the ending of this class. But no questions for the video? All right, we'll end it there.